Alright, look, trying to find a good HDR monitor up until now has basically been like trying to swim in a sea of trash in search of the world's tiniest diamond, but today MSI sent over a monitor which they seem to believe is a good, affordable 4K HDR display. Now, is it? There's only one way to find out. Also, as you can notice, yes, I'm still sick, getting over it, but in any case, the monitor MSI sent over is the MAG 323 UPF, and this is a 3840 by 2160, 160 Hz, 32-inch, 16 by 9 rapid IPS monitor with 16 edgelit zones, a contrast ratio of allegedly 1000 to 1, and a response time of allegedly 1 millisecond. And yes, it has FreeSync and G-Sync support, and it is VESA Display HDR 600 certified, so that's a good step in the right direction. And it does have apparently viewing angles of 178 degrees. Now, yes, it does come with a stand. It can do basically everything you'd want except for rotate into a portrait mode, so I'd like to see that in the future. And in terms of ports, here you go on screen, pause if you need to, but the most important thing is, yes, it does have two HDMI 2.1s, but the DisplayPort is 1.4a, but I don't know what you guys expect out of a monitor coming in at $599.99 and being 4K HDR. Now, I will tell you it is also VESA mount compatible, and the overall design I would say is excellent. In fact, I think the MSI designed monitors in general, and this isn't just because they sent it to me, don't worry, if there's something bad, we'll tear into it. But in any case, I actually really love the design of their monitors overall. But enough about that, let's move on to the actual performance, starting off with the color. And my first impressions are, yeah, it's actually pretty good. It looks exactly how it should. Now, of course, it is an LCD-based display, so it's not going to look as good as something like Quantum OLED or even WOLED in many aspects, but it's exactly how it should be, and that's good to see since I've had so many buggy and off displays in the past, at least in my personal use. Now, in terms of the actual calibration, out of the box, the DCI P3 calibration is actually pretty good and doesn't really require too much fiddling, so I didn't do any whatsoever. However, the sRGB performance was a little bit off. As you can see here, it is under brightening some spots near the bottom of the curve there, and the RGB balance is definitely a little bit off. So I did go ahead and create a couple of profiles for sRGB as well as Gamma 2.2, but since this thing can't get to an exact 0, I probably would stick with sRGB, and I will have all my calibrations and ICC profiles as well as a link to the Discord in my Patreon, and it does really help the channel if you do that as well, so I appreciate that, and hopefully you get a lot of help there. But in any case, moving on to the HDR, and here, unfortunately, yes, it is off as well, and this is something that I have a very limited ability to try and fix, so I don't like it when they aren't following the EOTF curve, as you're seeing right here. It's over brightening some stuff near the bottom, and it's also over brightening some stuff near the top, so I would like them to get that EOTF curve tracking a little bit better with some future revisions. But now let's go ahead and talk about the color volume. Overall, I'll tell you guys, it's pretty good. You get nearly 100% DCI P3. We're talking about 94% in both SDR as well as HDR, so that's to be expected and very good stuff there. But now let's go ahead and move on to the brightness. That's a really important metric for an HDR display, and in a 100% window, since this is an LCD-based display, it does come in with a pretty impressive 624 nits, putting it around the middle of the pack, only losing out to some really bright mini LED displays, but it is very satisfying overall. My impressions of the brightness are, yes, it can get very bright. In fact, I'm actually using this monitor as my second monitor as I record this video, and had to turn the brightness way down because if I'm not actually playing HDR games, if it's to the left of me, yeah, it can get really bright, and I don't need that for my secondary display, but again, great for gaming. So anyway, moving on to a 10% window, also very important for HDR, and here you can see, because it's edgelit, it's just not going to be that much different, coming in at 638 nits, which actually puts it towards the lower end of the chart, so it's not going to be maybe as high contrast or impactful as some OLED and mini LED options. But now let's go ahead and move on to a game, and once again, pretty similar results, 580 nits, again near the bottom of the chart, but don't let that fool you. Sure, it's not going to have as great of highlights, but the overall scene was very bright. But now let's talk about the minimum brightness, and here it was a little bit disappointing, coming in at 0.16 nits, which is to be expected for an IPS edge-lit display. But if you're someone who's looking for the best of the best contrast in an HDR display, this just isn't going to match up to some stuff like the 57-inch Neo G9 or even the KTC M32 P10, which have 1,000 plus local dimming zones. In fact, the contrast ratio overall was 2,044:1, which is a little bit better than their typical metric that they had showing on their website, but not anything super impressive. Now, in terms of the blooming, yes, you're going to get it, and you're going to get a lot of it if certain parts of the screen are completely black. Otherwise, basically the whole screen is going to be lit up most of the time, because we're talking about just 16 edge-lit zones, which just isn't enough to show any micro contrast detail like a mini LED or OLED can. But what about latency? And here it was pretty impressive. At 160 Hz, we did get 28 milliseconds of total system latency, which overall is pretty good, and that does get it pretty close to some of the faster 4K displays that I've ever tested. So really good stuff there. And in terms of the motion performance, it was also very impressive at 160 Hz if you put it into fast mode. Now, if you drop down 120 Hz or lower, you are going to have to bring it down to the normal mode for the overshoot. But overall, it is still looking pretty decent at 120 Hz and 60 Hz. It does, of course, get pretty messy. But yeah, at 160 Hz, you can see it's significantly faster than, say, 144 Hz mini LED that doesn't cost that much more. So it is going to be probably a little bit better suited for online competitive gaming. But what about the text clarity and subpixel layout? Overall, the text clarity is really good because it's using a regular RGB subpixel layout, which looks really good. But what about the finish and perceived clarity? And unfortunately, it's going to be bad because yes, it is going to be using a matte coating. Now, thankfully, it's not the worst matte coating I've seen. There are kind of degrees to how bad matte can be, but quite frankly, all matte coatings look pretty bad to me, and this is no exception. You are going to be getting a far less clear image out of this display, and it is going to make it look a little bit dirtier. In fact, this screen also does suffer from a little bit of dirty screen effect, much like basically every single LCD I've ever seen. But what about the viewing angles? And I'm going to say it's okay. You know, going up and down, it doesn't really wash out too much, but as you start to get more and more to the left or right, it will start to wash out, and the uniformity is also okay. There is over 100 nits of difference from the brightest to the dimmest part of the display, and it does have some backlight bleed, I guess you could say, as it seems like some of the edge-lit zones are always on pretty much no matter what in darker scenes. But on a better note, the menu and the firmware is excellent. I had no bugs or any other issues like that, and it was super easy to get through the menu, and is probably what I would consider to be basically like the gold standard for menus. I really did enjoy that, and thankfully I didn't have any hardware issues with the display as well. So overall, it has an excellent design. It's a flawless experience in terms of not being buggy, but I do think it's just a little bit too expensive, guys. Now, it is far more affordable than other HDR options, but I think it does need to drop $50 to $100 before I'd be like really excited about it, because yeah, I do think it actually is bringing something with its HDR mode. It does definitely look better than the regular sRGB experience you're getting with other games and media within Windows. It is definitely worth calling this an HDR monitor, but it's just not going to be as high contrast as some of these 1,000+ local dimming zone monitors, which, by the way, I've seen some for as low as around $700 that have basically identical specs except for its HDR 1000, and again, over 1,000 local dimming zones, which is going to make it far better for HDR gaming. However, those monitors typically have a little bit worse motion performance. So I guess it's up to you, but I do think for that reason, it would be good to drop $50 to $100 on this display to make it just a little bit further away in price from those much more HDR capable displays that are available. But if you were to ask me, hey, I'm really interested in this, should I buy it? I'd be like, yeah, there's really no reason not to. Go for it if that's kind of the limit of your budget. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes of up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And with 48 gigabits per second of bandwidth, it can easily drive 8K 60 FPS or 4K 144 FPS 10-bit HDR video through its ultra-thin, flexible, and durable housing, and it even supports ER. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out Rupro on Amazon today.